Welcome to the WP Builds podcast, bringing you the latest news from the WordPress community. Now, welcome your hosts, David Waumsley and Nathan Wrigley.
Hello there, and welcome once again to the WP Builds podcast. You've reached episode number 383, entitled No Script Show Episode 14, The Front-End Divide, UX Designers versus JavaScript Specialists. It was published on Thursday, the 1st of August, 2024. My name's Nathan Wrigley, and for the very final time, I'll be joined a little bit later by David Waumsley. More about that in a moment. Before then, though, a few bits of housekeeping. If you like what we're doing at WP Builds, head over to our subscribe page, wpbuilds.com/subscribe. Over there, you'll be able to find the different channels that we produce things on. So, for example, there's Twitter, there's YouTube, there's our RSS feed, and most importantly, our newsletter. Sign up for that and get 2 emails each week. One when we create the This Week in WordPress content, which is a live show, packaged up as an audio podcast on a Tuesday, but also this thing that you're listening to now, I sometimes call the Thursday podcast. Well, that will also be sent to you as an email, so 2 emails a week, nothing more, no spam promise guaranteed. The other thing to mention is that if you would like to get your product or service out in front of a WordPress-specific audience, you can do that by heading to wpbuilds.com/advertise and see what options we have got there. A bit like these 3 fine companies did. The WP Builds podcast is brought to you today by GoDaddy Pro. GoDaddy Pro, the home of managed WordPress hosting that includes free domain, SSL, and 24/7 support. Bundle that with The Hub by GoDaddy Pro to unlock more free benefits to manage multiple sites in one place, invoice clients, and get 30% off new purchases. You can find out more at go.me/WP Builds. We're also brought to you by Bluehost. Bluehost, redefine your web hosting experience with Bluehost Cloud. Managed WordPress hosting that comes with lightning-fast websites, 100% network uptime, and 24/7 priority support. With Bluehost Cloud, the possibilities are out of this world. Experience it today at bluehost.com/cloud. And also, we're sponsored by Omnisend. Do you sell stuff online? Then meet Omnisend. Yes, that Omnisend. The email and SMS tool that helps you make $73 for every dollar spent. The one that's so good, it's almost boring. Hate the excitement of roller coaster sales. Prefer a steady line going up. Try Omnisend today at omnisend.com. And sincere, heartfelt thanks go out to GoDaddy Pro, Bluehost, and Omnisend for their continuing support of the WP Builds podcast. Right, what have we got for you today? Well, as I said, it's our final episode with David Waumsley, and I've got a bit of a preamble for this. It shouldn't take long to get through, but here goes. In November 2023, after 7 years of podcasting together, David and I decided to stop making content together for WP Builds. This was because David had started to create websites without the need for a CMS like WordPress. He'd decided to focus on learning HTML and CSS and to take his direction for learning from the W3C and the folk who are in that space. Well, it wasn't long before David contacted me to see if we could make a new podcast about all that, building websites with minimal software and skills. The No Script Show was born when I said yes. To give that show a head start, I decided to inject it into the WP Builds podcast feed, and I've done that for the previous 13 episodes of this new show. As the saying goes, all good things must come to an end, and so this, episode 14 of the No Script Show, will be the last time that you're going to hear it on the WP Builds podcast. It's now going to have a life of its own. We're going to be creating audio content, but for a while at least the content is going to be videos, which will show you what David has been learning and how simple CSS and HTML can bring you incredible looking websites once you know what you're doing. We might build a new site from scratch or perhaps rebuild existing sites, only time will tell, but it's going to be fun learning with David. And I hope that you'll continue with us by following or subscribing to the No Script Show, whilst also continuing to consume the WP Builds content. WP Builds is going nowhere. The best place to keep up to date with the No Script Show are the No Script Show website, the No Script Show YouTube channel, the No Script Show podcast RSS feed, and the No Script Show podcast page. There's also going to be some really new and useful intrinsic framework, which David is putting together, and all of the links for those will be put into the show notes. We don't know how often new episodes will occur, but we'd love your support and continued listening. Okay, let's get back to today's episode, which is called The Front-End Divide, UX Designers and JavaScript Specialists. In episode 14 of the No Script Show, both David and I discussed the division between UX designers and JavaScript specialists, focusing on Chris Coyer's article, The Great Divide. This episode, as I said, the last to be featured on WP Builds, delves into whether the divide between HTML, CSS-first developers and JavaScript framework specialists has narrowed over the years, touching on advancements in CSS, web components and web standards, and examining ongoing issues such as gatekeeping and accessibility. So there you go. I hope that you enjoy it. Welcome to the No Script Show about modern web design, where we look at what we can build today with minimal software and skills. Today we are revisiting a 5-year-old debate summed up in Chris Coyer's 2019 CSS Tricks article, which was called The Great Divide. It talks of the then growing concern that front-end developers were becoming divided into two distinct camps. Those who primarily specialize in HTML, CSS and focus on UX and accessibility, and those who primarily specialize in JS libraries and frameworks like React.js and focus on component design, i.e. the CSS in JS movement, which took off 5 years earlier. As it's another 5 years on, we're looking at what's changed. David, are you a concerned front-end developer?
Yeah, I love the way you bring me in on it. Yeah, well, we neither of us would call ourselves developers or designers and that,
Nope.
but I think, we fall into that category because we primarily make designs work on web pages. We deal with the HTML and CSS. So, yeah, and we do a little bit of what I didn't include in those notes there is that would include a bit of JavaScript as well, front-end developer. But generally, like us, somebody who's not really a programmer, but somebody who can modify a simple JS framework or PHP framework like we can. So, should we talk a bit about why we're doing this topic today?
Okay, let me pop the screen on. There we go. Nice graphic there. Sums it up perfectly. So this is the front-end divide. Off you go. I'm going to wind you up and say, go, David.
Well, we'll talk about just why we're doing this topic, because it's the last one that's people who just watch this show, the No Script Show, will not be aware that it's also going out on the WP Builds platform as well. And this is the last time it's going to go out there. So we thought we'd do a topic which is kind of relevant to what's going on in WordPress at the moment. And the article as well was created, The Great Divide we talked about, is by Chris Coyier, who's always been a big fan of WordPress and has a evergreen book, which he did with Jeff Starr, called Digging Into WordPress. And really fascinating, I think, about it is in that article, which came just a matter of weeks after the new Gutenberg project was launched and the block editor came into WordPress. In that, he attributed the skill set of the traditional HTML, CSS first front-end dev to kind of WordPress. That was WordPress for him, but it still is effectively. Right. So he listed that, but it's quite interesting as we've gone on. Things have changed there with the block editor, where it's more of CSS in JavaScript, and you need, if you want to get into the real customization of it, you need to get into that kind of side of it. So I thought it was, we'll talk a little bit about that later, but maybe we'll just cover what's happened in these 5 years.
Okay, that sounds perfect. So just for those that are listening, and what David's just said is true, this is going to be the last one that goes into the WP Builds feed. So if you're listening over there and you've enjoyed it and you'd like to continue listening, I think we're going to probably shake up the kind of content that we're creating. So we've been doing these, and then David's had his add-on videos, if you like, which complement what we're doing. But I think for the next period of time, we're going to concentrate on YouTube. So the podcast itself may take a bit of a pause, the audio-only content. Nevertheless, if you want to keep up on what we're doing, go to noscript.show. So that's the URL, noscript.show, and everything that we do will be put in there. So maybe that homepage will take a bit of a, maybe it'll be changed in some way to reflect the new video content. But also, if you want to find out what this episode is all about and you want to see the show notes, this is episode 14. So go to noscript.show/1414. Okay, there we go. Right, over to you again.
Yeah, so let's talk about the divide. Well, actually, just before I do that, I'll just say that future me is going to record something which hopefully will be on the front of this, which will explain what we're doing next. But generally, that's another WordPress-inspired thing. There's a lot of stuff there where people are showing their work on building an entire design or something. And that's what we hope to do with the content when we focus on the YouTube stuff.
Yeah, so is the YouTube stuff then, the idea in the future is to create a fairly lengthy video, which is, I don't know, it's like, here's what we're looking at, here's what we're going to do, and here's how we did it kind of thing. So it'll be a walkthrough, we'll have an idea of what we want to do, whatever that may be, and it'll be kind of top to tail, from start to finish, with some takeaways at the end and maybe some, I don't know, downloadable bits and pieces that you can take away and do what we did. Yeah, that'll be nice. That'll be a change. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I keep interrupting and reiterating everything you've already said. So the Great Divide, what's behind it?
Yeah, so, a worry, I think. All the traditional folks started to worry about 5 years previous to this article, really. We saw React come out, and that changed things for how you would traditionally go about web design for those standards people. So I think there was a worry for some over gatekeeping and also a gender bias, which is something neither of these things I really thought about, maybe the gatekeeping side. But if you now have to be a programmer before you can start to do front end, which was traditionally something that you could do without knowing a programming language,
right.
HTML and CSS are still what's outputted, but it's declarative and something which traditionally more women have done, because it tends to be something that, for one thing, you could do that. If you want to be a programmer, there may be 7 years of training to become somebody who's skilled in that HTML and CSS. Well, a lot of young women will have careers where they'll be younger. They may want to have childcare things that they want to do. They'll have children or something like that. So women have often traditionally sort of adopted HTML. And we only need to look at the leads that we have now in CSS. All the people we talk about, most of the people we're looking to, I would say, tend to lean towards women.
You mean the thought leaders in the sort of CSS space? If you were to look at a list of the great and the good in CSS and what the W3C are doing, we've shown in the previous episodes, a lot of the content that you've brought to my attention has been done by women, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. So, a couple of people have spoken on this. There's a great article by Rachel Andrew and also one by Hayden Pickering, which is mentioned in this. So there's both of them, I think, refer to other people's work on that. So it's quite an interesting thing to think about. If you have to make it complex to make a start, you've lost that route into web development and it has worked out that it's excluded more women as a result of that.
It was definitely a lot easier when we began, because obviously, both of us have been doing this for about 20 years. The barrier to entry was almost zero. You could be as, honestly, I think I could have understood absolutely everything that it was possible to understand by reading just a handful of books, not even long books. CSS was fairly straightforward. There was really, nobody was using JavaScript. So it was HTML, a little bit of CSS, and you could understand all of it. And of course, now fast forward to 2024, when we were recording this, gosh, it's no longer a pamphlet that you've got to read. It's now a weighty tome. And that does make it more difficult to, I guess, successfully get onto the bottom rung of the career ladder and make your mark. Because in order to make your mark, you've got to understand all of the bits and pieces so that you look professional.
Yeah. And I think, with women, they I've often gone to jobs where the communication is a key thing, and often in an admin communications with audiences, they would be updating content, and that would be in HTML, which is a fairly easy language to understand and communicate and focus on that. If you have to do that via JavaScript, it becomes a lot more difficult. So yeah, so it's that. And I think the other concern that comes out of that is the worry that web standards would start to fall because, and I think there's an element of truth in that, because as JavaScript became the thing to do, really it's JavaScript libraries, and employers, I think, saw the opportunity to have somebody who's trained as a full stack developer who can do the front end and the back end, and they can save costs. But the problem is then people are going to train with JavaScript first, and it's going to be a secondary consideration, HTML and CSS. So you end up with the standard slipping. The output actually gets a bit worse because the concentration is the more difficult stuff, the JavaScript.
If you could rewind the clock back to, I don't know, let's say like 1990 or something like that, right at the beginning when the internet was taking off and a handful of people had the internet, do you think it would have been a better idea to just not come up with JavaScript, to just get rid of JavaScript altogether and just have CSS? Or do you think that was a good time, or would you have preferred it that what we've got now coming in CSS came like, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago?
Oh, God, that's such a good question. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's always had a difficult position, JavaScript. It came out the same week as CSS, and it's always been the way. I think we've got it in the notes there that whenever something is commonly needed, it goes into the just declarative languages. It goes into CSS. So more JavaScript, it's in competition always with JavaScript. Right. But then, when we're looking at this era, this excitement that came out 10 years ago from now, we couldn't do that sort of stuff. No, it wasn't envisaged. Right. So it's pushed us forward. But I think the same concerns as we've talked about before with Flash, it goes a little bit away from the normal order that the W3C see the web developing. JavaScript is something that goes over the top as needed, where it's there to tell the browser how to behave. Where we really want, it's something where the browser knows to take instructions from you. Anyway,
we sort of got derailed there. Sorry about that.
It's a good point. And I think the third thing I've put down, the worry that might have come out of this, is the code complexity. It's something that Jen Simmons alluded to when we were talking about her introducing intrinsic design and that bringing a cost to the environment and users. This isn't true for WordPress because it doesn't output the React, but if a load of JavaScript has to be outputted, as it was the case, then it actually slows down the performance, which became a big issue. And of course, it's just a lot of code that we all have to consume, wasn't needed for the result,
Well, JavaScript was always, for me at least anyway, was always the most difficult part of the job. Trying to do things in JavaScript was always tripping me up. I could easily work with PHP, CSS, HTML, but I don't know why, I just found JavaScript much more difficult to handle and manage. Constantly seemed to be in a state of flux, and then there were sort of shortcuts. Remember jQuery came along and everybody leapt on that because suddenly it was a little bit more human readable and easy to comprehend. I think there's definitely something about that. It was too complex for me to become an expert anyway. Okay, so shall we move on to this why does the divide exist part then? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll just read out the first one and you can interject as necessary. So you've got 5 points here. The first one being HTML and CSS not meeting and then you've got in brackets, perceived component-based design needs of the time. What were you thinking when you wrote that one?
I think generally it was seen that particularly CSS couldn't... you were managing the cascade all the time and it was getting in the way, which is really the next point. You might as well read the next point because
shall I go? Yeah. Okay. So the next one would be CSS not seen as easy to scope for large scale team project work. So that sort of speaks for itself. But link the two together.
Yeah, that's really it's that. I think really from 10 years ago we've been trying to control the cascade. Because it's difficult with teams to get your naming right, to organize your CSS, because it's worked on the basis of a page, it cascades down. So it should allow us to write less CSS. But when we get more little components which we want to split this page and that page, then we try to flatten out the cascade, which we're moving. So I think that was the big issue for people. It didn't seem like it could scale.
Yep. Okay. So the next one then was browsers not being trusted. Better to use JS to tell them what to do. And I think the key phrase there is tell them what to do. It's like hitting a knot with a hammer or something, isn't it? Just do what you're told. We can't do it the way we'd like, so we're going to do it with JavaScript.
Yeah, exactly. And, when it couldn't do things, because, not all the browsers were working together, you're waiting a long time to be able to achieve some of the things that you thought you wanted to do with the web. And so in a way, you kind of use JavaScript to tell the browser what to do. And I think that's shifted a bit, which we'll move on to.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely changed, doesn't it? Okay, then. So the next one is all about marketing. So this is companies like Meta and Google. And you've put here that they seem to have lost a little bit of their push promotional aspects. I don't know if they've still got the same number of boots on the ground developing, but things like React and Angular seem to, I don't really know whether they've lost popularity amongst developers, but there's certainly less conversation about them around the place.
Honestly, I don't think React could be any more popular, but, for some, which we'll move on to, it could be considered legacy in this day and age, over this time, but, in terms of this takeoff, because when you've got somebody like Meta and Google behind these new JavaScript frameworks, they're going to have more marketing. It's going to have more of an impact on people than, say, the W3C, which is all about setting standards, which is, it's academic, it's not easy to read. So the appeal of being able to do something now created those. I think both of them have lost interest in those as companies behind them, but they're still open source, so they're supported by people. And industry still like the idea of a full stack developer who can save them some costs, and people are still learning because that's what people will employ them to do. So I think, React is extremely popular, but I guess if you're on the cutting edge, you probably see that it has changed over the time. So, yeah.
Do you think that these companies, the likes of, certainly Google seems to have a lot of skin in the game when it comes to open source. I attend WordPress events, and Google have great big sponsorship areas, and they're obviously trying to talk to developers. You never sort of see Meta in the same way. Maybe they do attend events, but they don't seem to be part of the broader open source project. So that's also kind of interesting. And also the fact that you are relying on these companies to supply something of which might be the bedrock of your project. And obviously, at the moment, there's no hint that Meta or Google will go away, but they could. I mean, it's not inconceivable that, Facebook will become far less profitable. And so things like the sort of the financing that they put behind projects like React will just sort of disappear. So, the standards-based thing seems to be the arrow that Google are following at the moment. In the WordPress project, they're sponsoring a lot of people to do, performance-related things and things like that. So, okay, and the last bullet point, the amazing real-time user interaction JavaScript brought. That was nice.
Exactly. I mean, there's just things you could do in your browser that you couldn't do before with HTML and CSS. So you understand why it took off so much. So that's true. There's a great quote, I think, by Rachel Andrews here.
This is a great quote. Yeah, I'll read this out. So Rachel Andrews, who we've mentioned various times, she made the following observation, which is lovely. And I quote, "CSS is simultaneously too easy to bother with, yet so hard it needs to be wrapped up in a ball of JavaScript in case it scares the horses." That about sums it up, really, doesn't it?
It does. There's actually on the same article that's taken from, and there's a link there at the very bottom of it. And again, we have to put it in its time frame. It was back in 2019, which she's talking about that first wave of JavaScript. But she did issue and I've heard it said with other people, actually in WordPress as well, because if you are a JavaScript developer, you go, what's wrong with you? To be a front-end developer, you need to know JavaScript. What's wrong with it? And she makes this complaint at the end, though, saying, don't think for 1 minute I couldn't learn this stuff and that I'm old hat and I'm defending my old ways. get over yourself if that's what you think. But she does say that a 22-year-old her might have just run away if it was JavaScript she had to learn.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's quite interesting. So just linking in with that gender side of it. Okay. So should we talk about what's changed over the last 5 years? Is this divide getting smaller?
Yeah. Go on. Sorry, I interrupted. You go first.
No, it's fine. I've just put this into two sort of sections. Technology has changed quite a bit. So CSS, that's rapidly been refactored, particularly with Rachel Andrew again. She's with bringing grid and so much else that she's done with that. And as it always happens, that's starting to take on some of the things that JavaScript traditionally did, including interactive stuff now. So
yeah, it really does feel like it's a bit of a renaissance is probably the wrong word, because we never really had a time where it did these things, but it definitely feels like CSS is going to become a really credible, career path. I don't think anybody at the moment, well, there's probably a handful, but it's not like, in job descriptions, it's saying the only thing that we need you to be good at is CSS, if you're a developer. But I can see that coming. With all of the different bits and pieces that we've mentioned over these past 14 episodes, I can see a point where you would hire a developer who's only good at CSS because it does all the heavy lifting. Well, maybe not all of it, but it'll do a heavy proportion of that lifting. So, yeah, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I think Rachel Andrews' point as well about, being simultaneously these two different things, too simple to bother with and too complex. And I think it actually it's become more of that, because it's always been something that the designers have gone to for styling, but also it's become almost a programming language as well, in the sense that we're making everything fluid with calculations. It's doing all the maths. We can create games with CSS only. So you can kind of be both. You can be somebody styling and a bit of a programmer within just CSS as well. So
right. Yeah, I think you summed it up much better than I did. The idea that you could build a game in CSS, it just seems so weird from, our old selves from 10 years ago, but it definitely is moving in that direction. I think therefore you'll become more credible as I don't know, if you've got that skill, I think you can put that out into the market, and in the future, that might be the only thing you need. Okay, the second bullet point then was browse. Oh yeah, I mean, we touched on this earlier, but browsers working together to speed up progress. That's probably the most profound thing, I think. With the browsers working together, everything's accelerated, and rather than all trying to compete with each other, just this common sense approach of let's work together, it just accelerates absolutely everything, because you're not trying to work on 4 different ways of doing the same thing. Now we're working on one way of doing the same thing. It makes it easier for the browser manufacturers, but it makes it easier for people like me to use it, because there's just the way.
We can't catch up with it as well, because so much has come out and is supported in all the browsers. It's interesting because this thing that we're going to do is very much based around the fact that you can have a very fluid sort of breakout sections in your web design, not just fluid typography. And it's interesting, CSS Grid makes this possible with grid lines. And we're almost going 8 years since that's been supported in browsers, and Calc's been around about the same length of time. But suddenly it's taken all of those years for people to realize, I can put these two together and make something really fluid. And I can think of about 5 people who've independently had the same kind of idea.
Why is that, do you think? If it's been in there for absolutely ages, what is the reason? Is it just that there are these personalities, and suddenly there are people who are at the top of their game putting out content and, joining with the W3C and Mozilla and all these other organizations? How do you explain the fact it never took off in the way that it could have?
I just think it's always behind, we're always behind what people are seeing. So when it comes out of the W3C, even back to Flexbox, which made it very difficult for people like you and I to learn at the time of responsive web, but our mental approach to everything wasn't fluid thinking. So once you start to suddenly go, you start to put things together. It's interesting how, it takes years for people to kind of put it all together and start thinking about design or web design in a different way. Stop thinking of it as a replica of print and start seeing it as this squishy thing. And then you think, this calc makes it squishy. And we've got these lines in grid. We can do something. It's interesting, I think.
I think also we're not. It's not exactly, for want of a better word, it's not the most sexy topic in the world, is it? What browsers have shipped? But if you think about it, if you think about like the iPhone, Apple make a great deal of fuss about a feature which is either pointless or not much better than the previous version, and they spend their billions of dollars advertising it and shipping the units, obviously because there's a profit motive in there for them, and I understand that. But this isn't really the same, is it? And yet it's profoundly impactful. We're going to be able to do an awful lot more, but it's not that interesting. It's never going to make the mainstream media. You imagine opening up TechCrunch and seeing an article about some aspect of CSS that's been on. It's not going to happen. But, you've got a new menu item on iPhone. Woohoo! Everybody gather round. So we do have a bit of a problem with that as an industry, I think, marketing it, because it's not that interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think another thing that's major on this one is web components. So this is, well, basically it's an odd word. It's just standard stuff. Really, we are talking about HTML and CSS with JavaScript controlled in it, but in a different way. Everything's standards rather than third-party component-based libraries and frameworks. And I think that really does change things. Chris Coyier, who we're talking about with the Great Divide article, who's a big WordPress fan. I mean, most recently, he's kind of, that would be his dream, that WordPress start to move away from React to move towards web components. And it may well do it, because a lot of people they're kind of becoming interoperable. So if you like your Vue or React or whatever is your way of working or something, you can start to convert these into web components so they're not dependent on the initial library. So I think that's where I think the divide is getting smaller. There's a kind of move with the JavaScript people who may have only gone that route, where they get back to CSS or HTML.
Well, that kind of links perfectly to the next bullet point, which you've described as JavaScript or JS fatigue, JavaScript fatigue. And the fact that you might have to maintain a gigantic set of complex dependencies. That's kind of interesting as well. I don't really follow this too closely, so I'm going to be guided by you there. But you've sensed that a bit? People, fed up with how complex their projects have become and all of the different things. I mean, my understanding is things can get very complicated very quickly, and that obviously is a bit of a pain in the neck.
Yeah, I think what it is obviously it's been something that's radically changing. People move from platforms because they think that might do things better. Obviously, the platforms have changed because they're controlling the browser, and there's some downsides of that. Obviously, the big downside, and again, it's not a WordPress thing with this one. When you use React to output, NASA's an example of a site like that. It had initially, before it went onto WordPress, it was on a React system which had to output so much stuff that it took so many seconds for you to see anything. It was just a black screen to get its interactivity. And people made jokes about it, saying, "Is it supposed to represent the darkness of space or something?" It's blank space.
No, it's just slow.
Yeah, it's slow. So there's a lot of change in how it might work and how it might control. But then I think the other thing is, the big plus about it is that you can borrow these libraries to put in your components and stuff. Well, when you've got a lot of that, you end up with a whole bunch of dependencies. So you end up with big organizations going, "Oh my God, one developer stuck in this, which is a repeat of this one somewhere else. And then I've got to maintain this and update it." So I think, but that's my understanding of it, because of course it's beyond my
Yeah, me too. So, but as an industry, we do love nerding out, don't we? We do love overcomplicating things in order to just try the latest thing. And this really is, in order for that divide to get smaller, I guess a proportion of us need to say, enough. We don't need all this complexity. Just let go, move away from the JavaScript, and let's just keep it simple. But okay, JavaScript.
Exactly. It's a fundamental of the W3C, isn't it? It's the rule of least power. It's keep it simple, stupid in web terminology. We always forget it. We always make things complicated.
Gosh, yeah, we love it. And talking about it as well. The next one's my favorite. The Cascade is back.
Yay!
I can imagine a superhero wearing a cape, with a big slogan, "The Cascade is back," with things like @layer, @scope, and where. And you've put here a move to doing more with less code, just like we mentioned a minute ago.
Yeah, so I think, there's we had, just on the CSS side of things, you would have things like Tailwind, JavaScript people like that, because they didn't have to deal with the intricacies of CSS. They could kind of component by component or utility by utility make it work. But it's very bloated code to do that, and you don't really understand the cascade or how CSS works. What's great about it now is that you have got a way of controlling that with at layer and at scope, so you can make it scope. And it affects people as well, like, people who use BEM, which is, very popular again as a way of flattening out the cascade. But again, it means that you're writing more code than is actually needed. But if you still have difficulties, you can still put things in a layer and have it separate. You can flatten out the cascade that way. So I think that has a big impact. I mean, it's only just supported, and scope isn't fully supported yet. So,
Well, if you thought the cascade is back was good, hold your horses. Here comes WebAssembly to the rescue. So this is, honestly, I think this is going to be fascinating. Well, maybe even the future. Let's find out. You've put a new web standard with more power than JS. I don't know about the intricacies of how it works, but I've seen projects built upon it, a lot of them, and it's pretty profound what's going to be happening in a browser near you soon.
Yeah, I'm going to have to get used to saying WASM. That's what it's called. Yeah. It's fascinating. Just the idea that now you can take any programming language and make that work on the web and work in the browser. And again, there's lots of examples out there of people using this now, but WordPress is one of those examples with its playground where you can actually spin out a working install of WordPress.
Yes.
And use it. I've been playing around with it. So I think, it's fascinating what you're going to be able to do. Of course, this isn't what I'm going to learn at all. I'm not a programmer. This is going to be for the real nerds.
But you are going to benefit from it. We all will benefit from it. And it is going to be pretty profound, I think. The playground example is the one that's closest to my heart, because obviously, doing WordPressy things. And this is the ability to basically click a button and you get a version of, you get an install, a complete WordPress website in the browser. It's not on any complex server. It installs, I think it's MySQLite. And anyway, we don't need to get into how it does it, but in the background, it installs all the bits and pieces that you need inside the browser. And at the moment, you click close, you close the tab, and it's all gone. But in the future, they're going to make it persistent. And that's amazing. Imagine, honestly, I can't imagine what's going to be possible, because I think it really does need experts to get in there. But the ability to have, even on your phone, a running application inside the browser, it kind of feels to me as if the promise of a Chromebook suddenly becomes much more realistic. Throw away your Mac, throw away your PC, you only need a browser. And we'll see how that goes. But it does look like one of the most exciting things on the horizon at the moment.
Yeah, I should put a link into actually a Google chat about that, because it gives examples, including WordPress, but it gives other ones where it's running the chat application and all sorts of things, and gaming running on the web. And I do think that's why the divide between sort of your HTML, CSS and your JavaScript library people is going to change, because I think most of them with the programming languages will start moving towards WebAssembly, where it can do even more than JavaScript. So I think, that kind of change things there. There's a little small section we could talk about, which is just the user demands have changed a little bit. People, I think I hear more and more people who will stick their browser into read mode, so the design that you created for them just disappears, so they can read the web. And my browser, I use Brave, and I haven't put the setting on, but there's this reader mode where let's say you go to a website, any website, and it detects that it's a text-based thing, and then it switches it on. But it does it by itself. I didn't tell it to do it, and I often have to switch it off, because the reason I want to go to that website is often to look at the design and to enjoy that experience. But more and more, the browser is making that decision for me. I really ought to go and find out how to switch that off, because in my case, I do enjoy looking at the design. But for a lot of people, I think it's a utility thing. You go to a recipe website, you don't need all the faff and the adverts and all of this, that, and the other. You just want to see, what are the instructions? Show me them in text. Nice and clear and easy, and the same would be the true elsewhere. Yeah, I do wonder if we've got a bit carried away with
with design on the web, and a proportion of people want it just plain, simple, easy.
Yes, and we want also the web to be everywhere. So,
Yeah.
on things that might be on our fridge is the example that I think Jen Simon used to describe that. And I think that's why we're looking at things different. And our frustration with CSS has often come from the fact that we're trying to mimic this print design that we've had, where we have to think, well, it's ultimately the message has to get through there. The styling, is kind of up to the user, and users now are changing their behavior. The reading, it's interesting because we mentioned the reading mode before, and just after we mentioned it, it seemed to disappear from Chromium browsers. But it's back again because I use it a lot,
So you invoke it though? You make a deliberate choice?
Yeah.
Well, I've messed something up in that case, because for me it often happens, and I have to switch it off, and it happens dozens of times a week. I read quite a lot of WordPressy articles, and for some reason the browser makes that decision for me, and then on other websites it doesn't. So it's kind of curious. Anyway, you just click a button in the URL.
Yeah, actually, there's the 3 dots on a Chromium browser, and if you scroll down to more tools, then you should find it there.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go and fiddle. Maybe I have accidentally done that. But I think you're right. I think maybe we are getting fatigued. That there seems to be a groundswell of, maybe that's describing it too vociferously, but there does seem to be a proportion of people who kind of want to have a different relationship with technology. They want less technology in their lives. They want the technology to be a bit slower. They want, their mobile phone to be less a part of their 4 o'clock in the morning doom scrolling cycle. And maybe more straightforward, simple design is a way of achieving that. Let the print people have the complex stuff, and on the web, let's keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people want the information on their terms. Yeah. And I think that's it. And also there's a move towards this, much faster loading sites, greener sites that are better for the environment and accessible and valid. They need to be valid code, which again is one of these things that start to slip a little bit when somebody just learns JavaScript and doesn't learn HTML, which, there was a survey. The first survey, interestingly, was done, was it the end of last year, on HTML, the state of HTML. Fascinating, because you think it's so simple that you know everything. And you go through this survey and you realize, I know about 40% of what's here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. That is interesting. Also, I think in the past, the idea of delivering the web faster was just, let's throw more energy at it. Let's buy bigger servers. Let's put more, carbon into the atmosphere so that we can speed things up. And that's definitely changing. In other words, let's have a smaller server and a less bloaty website with stripped down HTML, and really keep it simple, keep it valid. And that's the way to do, I'm going to call it sustainability. I know there's more to it than that, but you get the idea. So okay, that's interesting. So they're the user demands. And then should we move on to this WordPress divide section? Yeah,
we'll talk a little bit about that, because it's affected, obviously people like us who, I think back 10 years ago, so that really is the time when not only React came in, but I think page builders came in.
Yep.
And we were dealing with the responsive web had just come out. We got Flexbox come in. And for me, that's when I sort of slipped out of doing my own HTML and CSS and moved into builders. And I think a lot of us did that. So when Gutenberg came along with an alternative builder, then that was a big issue, and still is an issue that remains for the third parties, or do you go in with Gutenberg? But I think more recently as well, which I alluded to with Chris Coyier as well, is that from last year on, certainly with Matt Mullenweg making a big push towards moving to block themes, that is for somebody like him who's always been a PHP developer creating themes, then that's a massive change there. So there is this sort of division playing out, I think, in WordPress at the moment, where if you want to, and it would seem sensible to use the block editor as a sort of page builder for someone like me who makes those sort of sites, that would be logical, but it's not quite does all the things that you would want it to do. You can get full control over your HTML and your CSS. And in order to do that, you would either have to make your own components learning React, so there's a bit of gatekeeping, or you would at least need to do CSS in JavaScript with JSON. So that's a bit of a block. So I think it's a fascinating thing that's going on at the moment for me. I mean, my solution was just to concentrate on, well, I don't know what tool to use when I need a tool, I'll just concentrate on the HTML and CSS. I can build plenty of sites with that until tools kind of settle down. So I think.
So hang on, wait. Are you looking like if the perfect tool, like page builder-y kind of tool, WordPress or otherwise, came along that delivered what you considered to be, I don't know, let's air quotes, good HTML and CSS, and it was something that you could control more, would you immediately flip back into that WYSIWYG kind of tool, or are you now like really into VS Code and writing it out line by line?
I think that's what's happened. I've that, but there is going to be I think it's an interesting thing. So as you can see, the people in our kind of peer group were the page builder people, and they're split where they have to go. And obviously it makes much more sense to go with the block editor because it's going to be looked after by, that is WordPress now.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, like it or not, that's what it is. And it's developing all the time, where all the third-party builders have this one issue that in order to be successful, they kind of have to pull in the DIYers and be a WYSIWYG for those. So as a professional tool where you need to control the HTML and CSS, it doesn't match. But there are them, and there's been those growing number of builders which are different to the ones that we started with, which are aiming at those, which is like Oxygen, Bricks, and we had Quickly, which has disappeared, and and even the add-ons, if you like, the ones that put an extra HTML and CSS layer on top of Gutenberg, like Generate Press. So they are all a little bit developer focused, but for me, I think they're in a really awkward position because they are building on top of their competitor, and also they have to, because they are commercial.
Yeah,
they have to bend to what people ask for, and as it grows in popularity, it'll attract more people, I think, who will ask for it to be made easier to do. So it's likely to go away from being a developer's tool as time goes on.
Yeah, I think the mission of WordPress is this, you know, it's a phrase which crops up a lot, is democratizing publishing. And I think it really is difficult to get the perfect balance on that seesaw. You know, on the one hand, you want it to be the perfect mechanism to output perfect HTML, CSS, or what have you, and you know, for developers to be able to get in there easily in a UI and change it so that it's, you know, so that even non-expert people can use it. But at the same time, yeah, exactly that. You need non-experts to use it because you're democratizing publishing. So on the one hand, you've got developers, you must accommodate them. On the other hand, you've got the just mom and pop who don't know anything about HTML. They're just typing stuff out and click publish and, oh, look, that looks nice. And I think that's really difficult circle to square. I mean, it's an impossible circle to square. You're never going to satisfy everybody, but it's a hard tightrope to get right.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when we talked on WP Builds before about this, I think my thinking on it changed a little bit in the sense that I think it was inevitable at about 2014 when React came out that WordPress would need to go that way.
Yeah. Because
it is democratizing the web. So it does need to appeal to people who, and traditionally it has, who don't have any coding skills.
Yeah.
So I think it's got to prioritize those. So I think when Chris Coyier says he would like, in his article, he talks about how he'd like WordPress to spend more time on the developer experience, how you build your own kind of theming and stuff like that. I don't think they'd be able to do that because the priority is always going to be the UI for the non-coders.
Right.
So I think there's winners. I think the winners are all of the people who want to do more than what they could wanted, or Wix-like experience on an open source project.
Right.
Getting more of that. The other winners are the people with big teams who can manage to create their own components, and then they've got this ability to create a CMS for high-paying customers who can pay for that, and they've got a team. The losers are probably people like us who just need to make a simple HTML and CSS site. And you think, I'm not sure if the page builders or Gutenberg do that as HTML and CSS get a little bit easier to manage.
I've always considered us to be losers, David. So it sums it up perfectly. Okay, so there we go. Have we reached the end of that one? I noticed you've got some links on there. Well, you've covered off all of those links, though, haven't you? They're the things that you mentioned throughout the episode.
Yeah. I might stick some more in if I remember we've forgotten some, but yes.
Okay. So that was episode 14, No Script Show, noscript.show/14, if you want to check out the show notes for that. But also, just a quick reminder, this will be the last one in the WP Builds feed. So if you want to keep up to date with what we're doing, which will be, I think, YouTube for a bit, or less audio, more video, because I think really, given the nature of the topic we're talking about, it's nice to see the results, and we're gonna make some actionable content, for want of a better word. So I think we're done for today, are we?
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
All right. In which case, I'll see you on the next one. Although I don't know if that'll be 15 or what. I don't know how we're gonna work it out. But I'll see you somewhere on the internet on a video. See you later, David.
Cheers. Bye.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that. It is with some sadness that we say farewell on a more or less permanent basis to David Waumsley from WP Builds. He's been hanging in there for 14 episodes of the No Script Show, but it's time to separate those two things. I really, really hope that you'll continue, obviously, listening to WP Builds. It's going nowhere. We're going to keep trucking. But also, I hope that you go over to the No Script Show and sign up. All of the links will be in the podcast episode show notes for this. So go to wpbuilds.com and search for episode number 383, and you'll find all of the different bits and pieces, ways to subscribe, the No Script Show YouTube channel and RSS feed, and all of that good stuff. The WP Builds podcast is brought to you today by GoDaddy Pro. GoDaddy Pro, the home of managed WordPress hosting that includes free domain, SSL, and 24/7 support. Bundle that with The Hub by GoDaddy Pro to unlock more free benefits to manage multiple sites in one place, invoice clients, and get 30% off new purchases. You can find out more at go.me/WP Builds. We're also brought to you by Bluehost. Bluehost, redefine your web hosting experience with Bluehost Cloud. Managed WordPress hosting that comes with lightning-fast websites, 100% network uptime, and 24/7 priority support. With Bluehost Cloud, the possibilities are out of this world. Experience it today at bluehost.com/cloud. And also, we're sponsored by Omnisend. Do you sell stuff online? Then meet Omnisend. Yes, that Omnisend. The email and SMS tool that helps you make $73 for every dollar spent. The one that's so good, it's almost boring. Hate the excitement of roller coaster sales? Prefer a steady line going up? Try Omnisend today at omnisend.com. And sincere, heartfelt thanks go out to GoDaddy Pro, Bluehost, and Omnisend for their continuing support of the WP Builds podcast. Okay, that really is all that I've got time for this week. I hope that you enjoyed it. Please leave us a comment on the wpbuilds.com post. But that's it for now. I will say, all that it remains for me to say is, you stay safe. Have a good week. Here comes some cheesy music. Bye-bye for now.